this? Were you able to create the components setting in the startup, right? Yes. Yeah. Yes. So how we can work with the components, everything is fine, right? Next important, after understanding how we configure the components manually through the commands also. That means adding 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 a new component using CLI commands. We have commands. So what is the advantage of command is, so commands will automatically add and update the component for you. So what is the advantage of this adding component with CLI command is, um, Angular generates component and registers into app module. So it uses a scaffolding technique for configuring the component. Already, what is a scaffolding technique? Yesterday we discussed about that. So it uses a scaffolding technique for configuring the component. That means automatically it will wire up the logic for you. So how you can generate a component? There are so many options here. What you can do is, for that, first step is you have to open components folder in terminal. So we opened this components folder in terminal. You see we have a components folder, and open that components folder in terminal. In the project we have that. So I can just right click on the components folder and open in integrated terminal. It opens that components folder inside this terminal. Now here we have to just run a command. Actually, so many commands are there to generate a component. So you can use the following commands. Actually, we have the commands. I will just give a rough list for you. A tabular form. Few what are required for us. Others situation wise you will see them. Actually, command and purpose. The command purpose, what is the command and purpose? Actually, you have the command ng generate, G for generate. You can write generate or you can use the shortcut G. ng generate component, or you can use C, ng generate C component. So that is the shortcut actually. So the command here, G for generate, and C for component, right? So we can use that actually. ng generate component and component name, any name. This is the command. So what this is going to do is, it is going to generate a component generate a component. So with 4 files actually. It will have a component.ts file. It will have component.html file. We have component.css and component dot you have spec.ts. Actually, spec.ts is a test file. It is used for testing. So initially we don't need the test file, but basically this is the command, so which generates the component. So we just use ng generate component and the component name. So any name for the component you can give. This will generate all these files. There are so many options available. Actually, we can use various flags. Flags for generate command, flags for generate. What are the flags we have for flags means options actually. So what are the options we have for generate command? That means you can use hyphen, that is the flag. Skip tests like this. If you add this flag, this will not add, it will not add test file. So that means only 3 files will be generated: the TS file, the component file, HTML file, and CSS file. I will show you these commands. You have the flag called dry run. Dry run, so that means actually it will not generate. It will not generate the files. It will not generate the files. It is just a trail run to tell about what it is going to generate. So this dry run is used by developers to tell about what is used, or you say to specify about what is going to generate. Dry run is used by developers to first check what it will do actually. That means when you generate anything, is it going to affect anywhere else? What it is going to generate? What files it is going to generate? Are those files necessary for us? These all we need to first know and then generate. So dry run is a very familiar option we use to test first what it is going to generate. So here you see now I am running the command. Here I am running the command and ng generate command, generate component, nggc. And I will use here, so dry run. Dry run is the flag I am using here. So dry run is the flag I am using here. Now ng generate component dry run. Dry run is nothing but dry run initially indicates that you see it is asking component name because we haven't given any component name. So if I give any component name, home, like this, and automatically it will display that it will generate home component HTML, home component spec TS, home component TS, home component CSS. It will create all this. Not only creating, it will update into this app module also. Updating into app module means it will register in the app module. That's good. And see here, dry run means no changes made. That means home component is not generated. You can observe that in the components, home component is not generated. Then why you used this command? Just to first know, so what it is going to generate. Dry run means it will not really create. It will just ask, it will just show what it is going to create. So if you remove dry run, it will generate all this, right? So that is dry run. And see, if I don't want test file, so ng generate component home, and here I give a flag called skip test, and hyphen dry run again, because I am showing you all the commands, so I'm using dry runs first. And you see the skip test. So here you can see that it will not generate test file, because we don't need the test file every time. Only when we need testing, we need it. So later, if you want, you can add it. So you see now, so skip test, and you see it will generate only 3 files. This time test file is not generated, only HTML, only TS and CSS. Actually, we can use the options. So here, skip test, hyphen, we can also use like inline styles, inline style. Or we can also use the option flat. I will tell you these options. Flat means actually, you observe what happens is in the components, it is maintaining a separate folder called home. You can see it is maintaining a separate folder called home. In that home, it is adding all these files. So when I use this flat flag, what happens is this will not generate that folder. Directly, it will add your files in the components folder. So it will not maintain a separate folder for your component. It will mix up with other components. So other files inside the component folder. But we want sometimes separate folder, sometimes we don't want separate folder. Then we can use flat option. So flat indicates that so no folder is created. So that means you can use the flat flag. So will not generate a separate folder for component. So that is flat actually. You have various techniques according to your requirements. There is another command you can use, like I'm using skip tests, and I'm using here another option is inline template. These commands have undergone some changes actually. Inline template. When I use this inline template like options, so you see what it will do is it will not generate HTML file. It will generate only TS and CSS. Now, what about HTML? HTML we have to maintain inside this TS only, just like I showed you inline technique. So inline template means now it will not generate a separate HTML file. What is the intention? Intention is that HTML is maintained inside this TS file only. How to maintain HTML in TS file? By using template attribute. Already we know that. So that means, so I showed you yesterday 2 options. We have template and we have template URL. When you use inline technique, in inline technique, what happens is the presentation I showed you, like in the inline technique. So we will directly have HTML inside this TS file only, inside the TS file. This is called inline template. So if you want an inline template, you can write this. You can use this inline template. So this is inline template, means it will not generate the HTML file. It will not generate the HTML file. So here you see here, okay. It is not generating the HTML file. So we have another option, inline template. So will not generate separate HTML file. So it uses uh, template. It uses template. Yeah, it uses template. So in a TS file, .ts file, it uses template in .ts file. We have inline style also. That means you can configure here simply. So the command, you see, ng generate inline style. Inline style. Inline style, actually, it will not maintain a separate CSS file. HTML file, it is there. It will not maintain a separate CSS file. It will not maintain a separate CSS file. So that means, so inline style, so will not generate separate CSS file. So it uses styles. It uses styles in TS file. So if you don't want both HTML and CSS, everything you want to maintain inline, you know that. Now what you have to do, add these two commands in one option: inline style, inline template. So these are the flags I am giving. So inline style and inline template. That's it. Now, when I define that inline style and inline template, that means only one TS file will be generated. Only one TS file is generated and it is updated into this app module. Everything will be inline. So that means you can use combinations of all of these. So if you don't use skip tests, then test file will be generated. So that depends on your requirement, how you want here. So we can add the components and we can maintain the components in this way. So these are all the flags regularly used. That means you can use combination like inline template, and you can use inline style, and you can use the combination like inline style, and you can use skip tests. I will give better as a syntax to you. That will be better. That means all the combination here syntactically you can write like this. So ng generate component, and component name is home, and here we have skip test. It will skip the test. We have like options like inline template. So inline template. So we have like inline style. And you can use combinations like this. Don't use dry run now. Why? Because so if you use dry run, this will not generate. It will just show you. If you want to really generate a component, and you just need this command. So it depends on your requirement. So if you want ng generate component, you can say simply register is a component and simply put skip test. Only test file will be skipped, rest of all will be generated for you. And it will wire up with all the logic required for you. So that's what actually the advantage of these commands. So in our project, you can see we have some components here. And in the components, I have login component. Suppose I want to design a component. So then simply I can just run the command here. So ng generate component home, and the skip test I am giving. I don't want test file. It's your wish. You can keep the test files or ignore the test files. So, and hit enter, and you can see that I'm not using dry run now. So this is going to generate everything for us. You see now, when I look into this in the components, home component is added. And what interestingly you will find is in the component, all these three files are generated. Yesterday we saw that we are creating them manually. Now everything is generated automatically. And see, the logic that is required for that will wire up for you automatically. You see the ts file contains all the logic wired up for you. It contains all the logic wired up for you, and I no need to explain what these are. Already we know that. Only one additional thing you will see is your class is implementing some on in it, which we will discuss in the next levels, like what component cycles. We will discuss what are these events and why it have to implement these events. As of now, in the beginning level, you don't need this. You can customize. That means you can remove this. You can keep only what you want. So, and you can customize. That means I just kept here title. So, and say some home page. So suppose something like this. And I want to present it in the HTML. HTML already have some. And here I am designing. So some home. Here I will put title. And in the CSS, you can add some effects if you want. So that means, suppose we have the div. So wherever we have div, some border 2 pixels solid. So some red, something padding, some 3 pixels, something like this. And a text center, some text align center. Okay. And I want, you can see that in the app module.ts, home component is automatically imported. It is automatically registered in declarations. Yesterday, when we manually added a component, so we have to import it in app module. We have to register in the declarations. So, but startup, you have to manually. Suppose you want to start with this home component, then just simply you can keep that home component in the startup and make sure that you have its selector in the index page. Index page, we have app home. So that is the selector name for it. So you can have that selector name and you can configure the, so technically. Already yesterday I showed you, if you don't register, what happens? It is unable to your component. Already I showed you those errors. If you concentrated on what we have learned yesterday, you will see that if you haven't registered the component, then it is unable to load the component, right? So it is unable to load the component. And yesterday we detailedly discussed about that, right? So it is mandatory. I hope you know mandatory means, Rakesh Kumar, you know English? I hope you know English mandatory means. Right. So, because he's again and again asking, because silly, foolishly, that is it required? Mandatory means, is it required? I hope little bit you should improve your English. Mandatory means it is required. Okay. Right. So that is the point. Okay. Yeah. Now, we don't care all these people time wasting and all this, right? So we don't even entertain these things. Okay. So we don't waste the time in all such silly things, right? And let's continue. Now here, so we have this home running and it is in the startup. We configured that and we are accessing that here. So local host, now it is ready. Now your home page is ready and it is accessing and using it. Right. So this time we added a component and configured the component. So by using by using the commands. So various commands, how to work with them and how we can deal with them, right? Right. So technically, this is the basic approach how we can manage, right? Next important, after understanding how we can add the components. So these are the commands. So various approaches are there. So what I said, depending on your requirement, as per the requirements, can handle various options. According to the requirement, we can use all these commands and generate as per the situation. That is creating the components and configuring the components. Next important, after understanding the components, how we add it. The first basic thing you have to learn here is one more option is already we are using styles to improve the performance, to improve the presentation. So we will see how we can add Bootstrap. So Bootstrap for add Bootstrap for your project. So add Bootstrap for your project, or you can simply say enable Bootstrap. Add and enable Bootstrap for your project, because especially when you are developing web-based applications, presentations, styles, everything happens by using Bootstrap. How we can work with the Bootstrap and deal with the Bootstrap. So how we can configure the Bootstrap, we will see those points first. So to configure the Bootstrap and use for your application, because web development is all about Bootstrap. See, at a level of Angular, that means generally you people say that I am a Java developer. I know this in Java, I know that in Java, but I don't know HTML, CSS, Bootstrap. People will laugh at your skills. So that means at this level, you cannot say that I don't know Bootstrap, I don't know HTML, and I am a Java developer, Angular developer. It's so silly to hear it up. And it is mandatory at Angular level, you are building application means it's mandatory to have good knowledge of Bootstrap. And we have several alternative also, we will see that. So how you install Bootstrap? So how to enable Bootstrap? What you have to do is open your workspace location in terminal. Terminal. Open your workspace location in terminal. So, and you have to run these commands. So install Bootstrap packages. So how to install Bootstrap packages? So you need npm install Bootstrap. This is the command you have to run. So always use save flag so that it will not reset whenever any other dependency is reinstalled. Sometimes packages will reset when entire library is reinstalled. Means node modules is updated, then it will reset and it will uh, delete the changes you made. That's the reason save. And one more is because we are using Bootstrap, and the latest version of Bootstrap is Bootstrap 5. And we are using that Bootstrap 5 here. So we have npm install Bootstrap 5 comes with Bootstrap icons. So the latest version of Bootstrap is provided with Bootstrap icons. So instead of using font awesome like icons, you can go with these Bootstrap icons and you install these two. That means your project will be initially installed with Bootstrap. So let's run these commands here. So I'm just executing these commands. So go to, remember, you run from any location. So that means from the components folder or any location, the packages will be added into a folder called node modules. The packages will be added into node modules. You see, node modules is a folder. That's where everything will be installed, added. So you open the terminal. So this is our workspace location. And in this workspace location, so we are just using npm install bootstrap and save. Okay. And this is the Bootstrap library installed for your project. And once the Bootstrap is installed and it is configured, we will install Bootstrap icons also, which are available from the latest version. So that in our regular web development designing, so we will reduce using of manual CSS, and we will take help of all the Bootstrap classes and make the presentations more effective. So we are installing Bootstrap. Okay, done. One more we have to do, npm install bootstrap icons and save. Bootstrap icons again newly added from Bootstrap 5 onwards. Early version of Bootstrap is 4.6. So, and now the latest is 5. Latest almost more than 1.5 month. The new stable release of Bootstrap 5 is there. And some changes happened in this new Bootstrap versions. And this is the Bootstrap icons. Okay. Once you installed these two, so once you configured and install these two, so next step, what you have to do is, still your application is not ready to use Bootstrap. Because I want Bootstrap to be used in every component, then what you have to do is, so we have to configure. So actually, Bootstrap CSS files CSS files must be configured, must be linked globally to project, must be linked globally to project. For that, what you have to do is, so you have to go to we have styles.css. You see in the project, in the project src folder, you will have styles.css. So go to styles.css in src folder. So you go to that styles.css. In that, you can write the styles. That means this is where you can link the styles. But generally, when you link that styles in a HTML file, we use link tag. But in a CSS, if you want other CSS to use, you have to use import the CSS and use it here. That means global styles are configured here. We can write styles here or we can import styles here. So suppose I'm importing here. So I'm importing here. So that means I will import where the files will be. Actually, Bootstrap repository, // it comes out of the current folder, which is src, and dot dot slash comes out of the projects folder. So dot dot slash. Now you can go to node modules. In node modules, you will have Bootstrap. In the Bootstrap dist css, bootstrap.css, bootstrap.css. It is the Bootstrap core CSS file. We will not use Bootstrap jQuery here. We will use only CSS. Why we will not use jQuery? Because, so again, using jQuery of Bootstrap in single page applications will be a problem because they have DOM manipulations. So we use a concept called Angular material. I will tell you a basic about Angular material later. With that, we can create effective components. We use Bootstrap only for styles here. So another import, and we are importing. So from the node modules, so we have Bootstrap. This time Bootstrap icons. In Bootstrap icons, you will have font. In the font, Bootstrap icons.css. I hope you have learned this Bootstrap and Bootstrap icons location where they are present in Bootstrap when you learned your Bootstrap. So here, this is the basic location here. And I will link that, and automatically you can see the presentation little bit changes now. Suppose I will access this login page. I will go to app module, and I will keep that login component yesterday what we designed, login component. Here you can keep that in the startup of index page. Index page, we will keep the login component. So I'm keeping that login component, and you can see this is the login component. I will do one thing now. So for that, we'll return a lot of styles manually. So let's go to login component .css file and clean up this CSS we have. And in the login component HTML, so here, see, I'm removing all this, so which we manually added actually. Now this is how actually with the Bootstrap it looks like. With the Bootstrap it looks like this. Now if I want to add some Bootstrap effects and keep this in a proper way, so what I have to do is, so for this top I am giving a class. We have a Bootstrap class like container fluid. It makes responsive container, and inside that we will keep here the attributes and options like justify content center. We will use align items center. We will use deflex, which is display flex. These are all Bootstrap classes actually. Display flex, and this keeps the content center. And I will keep here height. So style, this is general height as some 400 pixel. Then it applies like this. And I'm using here for this div and the container we are having here. So see, for this text box, I'm using the class form control. You know that these are Bootstrap classes, and this is form control. So that is Bootstrap class. And for buttons, we have class btn and btn primary. And usually in the new Bootstrap, block buttons are defined by using the class as dgrid, display grid. This will keep your login screen in this way. This time we are designing the interface by using Bootstrap, that makes a good appearance for that. At Angular level, when you are building an application, you cannot design it like just a beginner. So you have to keep your presentations more effective, interactive, because in majority of interviews, when you go to interviews, so they will give you an API. They will give you an API, and they will say that you have to consume this API and create this type of presentation. That means they will give you screenshots, and they will say that first screen, it should be like this. In the second screen, it should be like this. You need to add filters. You need to add sorting. You need to add presentation like this. And they will give you even 1-2 days time. And they will say that do this and submit to us. Even for experienced people also. For experienced people also, to put you in a project, first they have to test so your skills of what you know. Then they will decide so in which phase of project you are suitable. So based on that, first they will see whether you are capable of building with more effectiveness, because having the skills about the topic is important. And at fresher level, experience level, presentation is also very important. If you are unable to present it properly, then you are not suitable as a developer for web, especially. We don't care you learned Java, you learned .NET, PHP, you are great in that, but you don't have basic presentation skills, no use for project. So that's the reason you should have good presentation skills with HTML, CSS and all. This is where first the interviewers will be impressed with the presentation skills, how they are trying to present the content. So logically, everybody will be fine. So, but presentation, you have to learn correctly. So we will see various options now. Now I have used a little bit Bootstrap. And I haven't used any Bootstrap icons. Actually, we have Bootstrap icons. Suppose I want to give some Bootstrap icons. So like, so sub icon for the controls and all. Suppose we have this data definition. This is for text box, and this is for the text box. And here I am adding a span before the text box. There is a span. And you see Bootstrap icons. Actually, we can get class. And so here we can use BI. These are Bootstrap icons. And we have BI. So BI different icons. So like BI, suppose I return house. And this is actually Bootstrap icon. And you can see that it will keep that house icon there. That means it will display that house icon there. That's the house icon actually. There are so many icons. And I will show you how we can keep the presentation. You can get that information from Bootstrap official website, Get Bootstrap. Icons is a new concept of Bootstrap. You go to icons, and here you can see so many icons are there. Suppose you can search for your icon. So like log. So we have a login. And so you have like user, some user. So you see so many options are here. That means we have like person. And click on that, you will get the name of the class, BI person. And you can implement that in your project. That means you can implement. So I said BI person. And for password, so I will keep here, this is the password. And yeah, this is the password. And here I'm adding a span. So class as BI. And suppose you see here, so we have the Bootstrap icon. So for that, and in the Bootstrap icon, I am searching here in the icons. I'm searching here some, usually password means like a key. So if you have like key, so symbol, you can see this is key fill option is there. I will use that key fill. So that means I will use key BI. Usually it will be like key fill. This is, and you have these icons designed here, username and password. And what we are doing now is I'm keeping this data definition as a class as input group, and I will keep this as input group text, another class input group text. And I am using this data definition as class input group because it is having symbol and control. And this span will have class that is input group text. Input group text. This will keep your screen in this way. That means you have username, so icon, passwords, icon, and a login button is available here. These are all very basically required when you are designing the user interfaces. I hope you have learned all this in your general HTML, CSS, Bootstrap. At this level, you must able to design in this way. That means logically you need to be perfect, presentation wise you need to be very perfect, because at fresher level, so first they see the presentation skills, how they are having, are they able to present it correctly or not. So because logical wise you can get on anyway, simply you can manage them. So but this is what very important for the presentations. So we enabled Bootstrap in style.css. What we have to do is in style.css, we have to link these two files. We are linking these two files. This is the two options we have to define. In style.css, we need to link that. After this next step, what we have to do is we need to implement Bootstrap in our components. So I made some changes here. In which location? login.component.html. In this file, I made some changes related to Bootstrap. I added some Bootstrap options here. I will give you this code here. So yesterday we already designed login component, but now we made it better. So presentation wise, we made it better with the help of the Bootstrap. I will show you some more alternatives because it's not just Bootstrap. You can also use materials. You can also use material. So this is Angular material. This also provides you the components like Bootstrap. So we have buttons, you have icons, toolbars, so many will be there. Date pickers, so many components they will provide. You can use this also to your projects. But one problem we will generally face is, as I already told you that yesterday, I told you that we can use even Telric also, third parties. So problem is no one is having complete requirements. That means if I say that material is good for Angular because it is developed by Angular for Angular. So that means by Angular team for Angular. But unfortunately, what is problem is it is not having everything you need for your project. In that case, what is available with them, we will implement. What is not available with them, we will go with Bootstrap and alternative. Bootstrap also will not have everything. Then we will go with material Bootstrap combinations like that. We cannot depend on just one. Why? Because it cannot happen. So because lot of requirements will be there, we cannot achieve those requirements. So we need to use a combination of various things. So this is generally how we can enable Bootstrap and use in this. This is creating component and presenting. Now, once you are good with creating the component, defining the component, designing and presenting the content inside it. Now, the first important major concept you have to know is data binding in Angular. Data binding in Angular. This is one of the key concepts you need to understand how data binding works. Actually, data binding is nothing but so data binding is a technique. Data binding is a technique used in applications to access data from store and present in UI. That is actually data binding. So it is a technique used in applications to access the data from the store. Store means don't think only database. It can be local storage, so backend database storage. It can be anywhere. Accessing data from any specific data store and present in the UI. Accessing it and presenting in the UI. Not only that, actually, it is accessing the data from the store and presenting in the UI. Not only that, identifying the changes, identifying the changes in UI and update back to store. So that is complete data binding actually. Accessing data and presenting it, identifying the changes and updating back. So that is what we call data binding. Now, different technologies have different approach of data binding. Actually, how you use data binding in your general JavaScript and jQuery like things. Generally, in JavaScript and jQuery like things, data binding so depends on actually JavaScript and jQuery uses lot of DOM manipulations for data binding. They use a lot of DOM manipulations. Might get element by ID, get element by tag name, get element query selector, class names, so many. So that means a lot of DOM manipulations. For example, if there is a text box and I want to access the value from the text box, suppose this is text box. I need to access the value from the text box. This text box have an ID, so as txt name. And I want to access the value of the text box and display in a heading. Heading have an ID as MSG. So I want to access that and display. Now, in order to access the value of text box and display in heading, so what we have to do is, while typing if you want, then we have to define an event on key up. On key up, we have to write the functionality like document.get element by ID. So MSG dot inner HTML, access that inner HTML. 1 second. Okay, a small announcement is like you have a tools class tomorrow. Last week, tools class happened as a workshop by Netra sir. And this week also you will have that continuous session, tools class. And people who don't have the classroom drive link, you have to contact the admin Nagababu. So he will send you the drive link for classroom material and all. Okay, right. Yep. So now you see here the DOM manipulations in your general approach. Inner HTML and here. So document dot get element by ID. So that is txt name dot value. This is how generally we have to access and bind the data, and it requires a lot of DOM manipulation. We are specifying on an event, get the value from this text box, present it here. This is in JavaScript. Generally in jQuery, what we do is little bit simplified. So we say like hash msg dot html. It is in jQuery. In jQuery, generally what we do is we define HTML. So here we write again, so dollar and hash, so txt name dot value. So val. So this is how we write in jQuery. It is a little bit simplified, but on key up, so referring the IDs, configuring the IDs, all this requires. This is generally in JavaScript, and this is generally in jQuery. But Angular point is actually Angular. So jQuery use lot of DOM manipulations. Angular is completely decoupled from DOM manipulations. So that means no more DOM manipulations, decoupled from DOM manipulations. It uses client side frameworks for frameworks like so MVC, MVVM. So for data binding. That means it uses client side frameworks MVC and MVVM. So that means client side MVC, MVVM. Actually, MVC server side will be there. So server side will be there, client side also MVC will be there. Angular is using client side MVC. I will explain a basic point about that. So this allows to easily handle the data binding. You don't need DOM manipulations. We don't need DOM manipulations. And another important is actually data binding is categorized into two types. So we have one-way binding, and we have like two-way binding. A lot of technologies don't have two-way binding. The best example is React. React.js don't have two-way binding. It supports only one-way binding. It should depend on third parties, other techniques for handling two-way binding. So one of the main reason of Angular in the beginning days becoming popular than other technologies like Knockout.js, not React.js. React.js later came. So when Angular came, the competitors for Angular at that time were Knockout.js, Backbone.js, Ember.js, such technologies. Angular became popular because of its two-way binding technique. Because other technologies were having only one-way binding technique, and it introduced two-way binding technique, which is very great. So even today, so several latest technologies of client-side environment will not support two-way binding technique. They need a lot of implementation for that. Angular comes with inbuilt two-way binding technique. That's good. What is one way, two way? I will show you now. So, and how this becomes very easy for us. So data binding, how it becomes easy. What is one way? What is two way? How data binds. So we will see. Actually, 2 points are there. So data, so that means bind data to property or to attribute. We can bind data to property or attribute. Generally, people call this as property binding, attribute binding. They call this concept as property attribute binding, but you can bind data to property or attribute. I will show a small point here. See. So for that, let's add a component newly. So just a simple component. I will generate a component here, ng generate component and a component name. So the component name I'm giving as some data binding. Okay. I'm creating a component called data binding. Okay, this is data binding component. And then let's keep this data binding in the startup. So data binding. Okay. And in the index page, I'm adding here data binding. We will see another mechanism, routing. So with that mechanism, we don't need to change every time. We can keep everything in one location and access them. That we will see in the next level. As of now, for practicing different concepts, we will create separate components. We will keep them every time in the startup and check them. So data binding is working fine. Now, in this data binding component, in the TS file, here, I will clean up these things which we don't need as of now. This is just general component. Even you have, doesn't matter. Here, I am writing a property. Class means how data is stored in a class property. So I am creating so product as a property, and it is an any type, and it's an object. That is an object. We will see how to present different data. How we can present different data, we will see that. So object, it contains name. So that is some Samsung TV like this. We have price and some price. And we have like stock. So true or false, some boolean. This is general JavaScript object. And I want to present this data. I want to present this data into the UI, in the UI. So that means let's go to its HTML file. Here, I will keep a div. So class, so container fluid and margin top 3. Okay. Here I'm creating a heading product details. And I will just add data list with the data term as name and data definition. And another data term price and data definition. And data term as stock and data definition. Now, generally, we need to access the data from this object and present in this UI. Then in JavaScript, jQuery, lot of work is there. That means we have to access the element by ID, the data definitions. In that inner HTML, inner text property, we need to apply. Here, generally, we have a data binding instead of binding to property. We have another technique. So generally, we call this as interpolation. Interpolation. So bind using interpolation. Interpolation is nothing but actually it uses angular binding expression. So that is this curly braces, two curly braces. That is the binding expression. It uses the binding expression. So generally, you can bind to any property or any attribute, any property or attribute using interpolation. Interpolation. So, but not recommended. Not recommended. So why I will tell you why it is not recommended. You can bind, but generally you can display through interpolation. Interpolation is nothing but what we do is, so here I want to access the product name and display inside this data definition. Directly inside the data definition, we can put a binding expression. Product is the property dot name. That's it. That's so simple. So you don't need any DOM manipulations. And here, so we are defining, so product dot price. And here we are defining product dot stock. And you see all those details are binded to the UI. It's presenting fine. It will even allow you to handle the expression here. So if product stock is equal to true, then question mark. I'm using a ternary operator. Available. Otherwise, out of stock. That's automatically, it will display that available. If any change you make in this stock as false and save the changes, and you can see it is updated as out of stock. As of now, we are just learning how to bring and bind it. This is interpolation. So you can bind through interpolation, but it is not good because what happens, I will tell you. For example, suppose, so we have an option disable. So that means, suppose I said is valid. Is valid, I given is a property. I given as false. Or I'll say is invalid, suppose. Is invalid is true. Is invalid is true. Invalid is true. It's having a boolean. Now, for example, I have a button here. And this button class BTN and BTN primary. Okay. And the button have like submit or say add product, something. And you see, this is the button we have. And I am using here disabled. This disabled property should take this Boolean value and change according to situation. That means disabled uses true or false actually. It is a HTML property. Here I am writing the binding expression. In the binding expression, I am passing the value as is valid, invalid, is invalid. Like this I am writing. And I keep this in the quotation. That means I said that is invalid, is valid. Like this I am writing. That means here we have that is invalid. So invalid, I written like this. Okay. That means disabled is invalid. Is invalid is having true. That means disabled true. If disabled is true, through interpolation technique, we are binding. And you see that disabled is true. That means it's not working now. The button is not active. So that means you see the button is not active. It's not working. Now what I will do here is, you saw that stock changed when I change it to true or false. So disabled, I will give it here invalid is false. Invalid is false. You can see invalid false, it will change. You see now I refresh, it's not working. That means see, for stock I said true. Stock, I said true. True. That means you see stock, I said true. Then it is available. But invalid is false. That means disabled is false. It's not updated. So interpolation. So the problem with interpolation is it is not good. Why? Because it is one-time rendering. After one-time rendering, if any changes required, it will not update. It is one way and one-time rendering. That's not good. It should keep continuous tracking. And if any change occurred, it should update. Then interpolation is good. So until or unless you are not binding with any property. If you are not binding with a property, that's good. Always use this. But if you are binding with any property, don't use this interpolation. Then what you have to do is you have to use the property binding technique. In the property binding technique, we will put the property name in a square brace and we will put the property disabled. Into that, we will pass the value is invalid. That's the value we pass. This is property binding technique. In this property binding technique, now it is working. So because it is false, I will change it to true. Invalid true. That means you see again disabled. Invalid is false. So that means again enabled. So that means it will enable that button again. That's good. This is the good way of binding. So when you are binding a property, then use this property binding technique. Here some more issues are there. I will tell you. One by one, we will explore all of them. So if you are not binding to a property, use interpolation. Use interpolation if you're not binding to a property. Remember, for data definition also, I can bind a property like this. I can use like inner HTML or inner text. Here I can put product dot name. I can access like this. That is also okay. That's also okay. It also works. But not required, especially when you are displaying in a container. So always use interpolation when you are displaying in a container. If you are binding with properties, then the property name must be defined in the square brace and you get the value and display the value. Here, several more issues are there. We will discuss about them. Suppose I want to attach to a text box. That means input type is equal to text. I want to attach to a text box. Text box have value. To value, I am attaching that product name. That means in the text box, it will be attached to the value and it will have that inside the text box. To which element you are attaching, for that element, what property it takes, you have to know that in HTML. Already you know in HTML, the text box takes the value and definitions, divs, spans, they take inner HTML and inner text. So you can bind the values. Why interpolation not good for binding to the properties? Because it will be one way and one time. Any changes later done, they will not update back. That is the problem with that. That's the reason we have to follow this mechanism. This is property binding. We have similarly attribute binding, class binding, and some more options related to this data binding that we will discuss in the next session. Okay, in the next session, we will complete the MVVM and MVC architecture. Clients, we will see how it works. One-way binding, two-way binding. So in the next session, Monday, we will discuss about that. Okay.